My name is Aurora, I am 32 years old and I live with my husband in a quiet suburb of Indiana. We own a small farm, enough to live on, enough to be happy, and most importantly, enough to be free. But in my family's eyes, especially my sister Monica, a successful Wall Street banker in New York, that is an unforgivable humiliation. At my parents' 30th wedding anniversary party, beneath dazzling lights and among hundreds of guests dressed as if they'd stepped out of a fashion magazine, she raised her glass, turned to me, and let slip a line that froze the room for a few seconds. Aurora chose a tractor mechanic for a husband, truly the only blot on this family. Laughter rippled out. Pitying looks. Appraising stares. And I, standing there exposed in front of everyone, could only squeeze my husband's hand to keep from crying. But who could have guessed that just a year later Monica and her husband would be on their knees begging that very blot for a chance to survive? Have you ever been humiliated by your family in public? Have they ever looked down on you just because you lived differently from what they expected? Leave a comment below and share your story. If you relate, please hit like and subscribe to follow the journey I'm about to tell. A journey that is not only about revenge but about waking up. And it all began the day I dared to choose my own happiness over their approval. I stood before the old mirror in my mother's bedroom, my hand smoothing the seam on the ivory wedding dress I'd spent 3 months stitching by hand after school and on weekends at the farmer's market. The dress was not glamorous like my sister's used to be, not beaded with crystals or French lace, but it was mine in the truest sense, fitted to my body and fitting to the simple, decent life I had chosen. Ethan was outside in the garden where we would hold the ceremony, checking the wooden arch one last time, his sun-weathered face breaking into a smile as always. He wasn't a man of flowery words and he never bowed to anyone for recognition. But he was the only person who ever looked at me without judgment. A soft knock at the door. My mother poked her head in, her gaze skimming over me and pausing at my trembling hands. "You all right?" she asked, but the warmth a mother should have on her daughter's wedding day was missing from her voice. I nodded and smiled. "I'm fine." "Uh-huh," she replied, lingering for a few more seconds before turning away. No praise, no hug. Just silence, as whenever I did something she didn't approve of. Guests filled the yard, mostly Monica's friends and our parents' acquaintances. I recognized them by the cool looks and stiff suits, a style I never felt comfortable facing. In that crowd my sister appeared like a stage star, a sapphire Vera Wang dress clinging to her perfect figure, hair in soft waves. Beside her was Charles, her soon-to-be husband, always seeming more concerned with being noticed than noticing anyone else. They moved through the gathering as if they were the main characters of the day. "You look plain," Monica said, her voice honeyed but with a bitter aftertaste. "That cute dress, is it from Etsy? Or did you make it yourself?" "I made it myself," I answered, forcing a smile. "I wanted it to mean something. Meaningful. Sure, frugal." She raised an eyebrow. "And your mechanic husband probably couldn't even afford to rent a wedding gown, huh?" I felt my cheeks flush. Behind me a few of her friends snickered, quiet but stinging. I turned to Ethan, who stood beneath the floral arch we had put together from storm-shed branches last month. He looked at me as if I were the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. In that exact moment I decided their words wouldn't make me any less happy, not even a little. The ceremony was simple and solemn. The pastor, an elderly neighbor who had watched us restore the old wooden house over 2 years, asked whether we pledged to face hardship together. I did not hesitate. Ethan said, "With you nothing is too hard." I nodded, voice thick. "I vow to walk with you for the rest of my life, even if the path is full of gravel." As we kissed to scattered applause, I heard Monica whisper loud enough for the head table to hear, "So romantic. Like an indie movie on Netflix." I looked back at her. She lifted her glass and spoke loudly so everyone could hear. "Congrats to bride Aurora, the only one in this family who thinks marrying a tractor mechanic is an accomplishment." A burst of laughter followed. I stood frozen. My mother glanced at me, then looked down, pretending not to hear. My father was busy pouring drinks for guests. No one rose to defend me. I scanned the room and found Lily, the youngest sister, at the head table, her eyes pleading at me as if to say sorry. But Lily was too gentle, too timid to speak up in a room where one word of defense could cost her a place among the favorites. I clenched my fist. Ethan came over and gently placed his hand on my back. "You don't have to stand here and listen to that," he whispered. No, I replied. I have to stand. I won't let them make me small on the day I start a whole new chapter. I'm proud of you, he said, eyes never leaving mine. When I picked up a glass of water and stepped up to the microphone, the crowd hushed. Someone murmured, "Oh, she's going to speak?" But I didn't make a speech. I said 4 words. "Thank you for coming." Then I bowed my head and walked away. My sister gave a faint laugh. Well, she is a simple bride. But when I looked at her, my gaze no longer wavered. I didn't need their approval. From that moment I understood that if life were a chessboard, they had miscalculated by assuming I had no valuable pieces. I didn't say another word for the rest of the reception. I listened, watched, and catalogued every look, every remark, every mocking laugh. I promised myself I would never be humiliated like that again. When night fell, Ethan and I left the party early. No fancy car, no lavish celebration, no honeymoon abroad. We went home to the table with worn edges, 2 wobbly chairs, and a kitchen still smelling of freshly baked goods. I sat down and slipped off the inexpensive discount heels I'd bought at the end-of-season sale. Ethan made me a cup of herbal tea, then sat across from me and took my hand. "Do you regret it?" he asked. I looked straight at him. "No. I just feel like I'm about to start something much bigger than today." I wasn't speaking out of anger or to get revenge. I was speaking because I believed that if the day came when they knocked on our door, not to check in but to ask for something, I would be ready. Not to give but to remind them. They once called me the blot on the family. And I would show them that what they despised most is the very thing they would one day beg to touch. 3 years later, I stood again before Monica's grand gate in suburban Greenwich. The white gravel flashed in the early autumn sunlight, and the black wrought iron gate opened slowly as if mirroring its owner's pride. Ethan parked our pickup a short distance away, just far enough not to spoil the view, as Monica politely noted in the email invite. I carried a tray of warm apple pies, having picked the sweetest red apples from our orchard and spiced them with cinnamon, and adjusted Ethan's shirt collar. He wore a pale blue shirt I'd bought at the local shop. It wasn't designer, but it was clean, well-fitting, and made him look trustworthy, just like he was. As we entered the stone-paved courtyard, soft jazz drifted from the outdoor speakers. Monica stood in the middle of the garden, hair impeccably styled, a costly white maxi dress hugging her perfect figure. Beside her, Charles held a champagne flute, jacket casually draped over his shoulders, as if pulled from the set of a popular drama. I set the pies on the long table draped in white linen. Before I could say anything, Monica turned with a radiant smile. "Oh, apple pie," she tilted her head, voice light as a feather but edged. "How sweet. Homemade." I nodded. "From the apples in our backyard." Charles took a sip and peered over. "Organic? Or just regular apples?" His tone sounded curious, but I felt the assessing undertone in each syllable. "We don't use pesticides or chemical fertilizers," Ethan answered for me. "Each tree is hand-tended. We grow to eat, not to prove anything." Charles raised an eyebrow and smirked. "Sounds like some farm-to-table spiel from Vermont." Monica lifted her glass, eyes fixed on me. "It's wonderful you've kept your identity. People choose different lives, right? Some choose Wall Street, some choose market stalls." I stayed quiet, not because I couldn't retort, but because I understood that their words weren't worth debating. Behind me, a group of Monica's wealthy friends chatted about Maldives vacations and buying stakes in tech startups. I smoothed the tablecloth with my hand, steadying myself. My father approached, in a crisp gray suit, measuring me as if assessing some invisible achievement. "You still selling produce at the farmer's market, Aurora?" he asked without hiding his disdain. "When will you do something a bit more worthwhile?" I heard Ethan inhale beside me. His hand squeezed mine under the table. "I'm living by my convictions," I said, looking directly at him. "And I'm content." "Belief is fine," he replied. "But money feeds a family. Farming like that, you'll regret it someday." "We're not short," Ethan said softly but clearly. "No loans, no begging." "Maybe that's enough." My father didn't answer, he only gave a slight nod and walked away, leaving a chill in his wake. A little later, Monica leaned toward me as people admired the koi pond designed by a famous landscaper. "Have you ever thought," she said, "if you really pushed yourself you could achieve more? I mean, you were educated." I pursed my lips. I once thought I had to reach what others expected. But I learned no one can live your life for you. She laughed. That sounds like something from a self-help magazine at the checkout. I looked at her, the white dress, designer shoes, the flawless house. Yet there was something dimming in her eyes. Not clearly defined, but I sensed a crack forming despite her efforts to keep the surface perfect. Sipping my lemonade, Lily leaned in and whispered, "Have you noticed Monica has been off lately? She's been tense." "Why?" I asked. Lily shook her head. "I'm not sure. But I overheard snatches of conversation, something about finances. Charles has been snappy. They even sold their Manhattan apartment." I was surprised. Monica never mentioned selling property. "Maybe just portfolio restructuring," Lily added, though worry showed on her face. I looked toward my sister. She smiled and poured drinks for guests, but her hand trembled when she set the glass down. A small detail, yet for me, who had lived under her shadow so long, it signaled that something was wrong. I thought of my father's look about the market stall, of my mother avoiding my eyes all evening. Those who'd labeled me a failure were suddenly initiating conversation. Part of me wanted to shrug it off and believe I'd risen above their influence. But another part, the part accustomed to getting hurt, grew quietly watchful. When the party ended, Monica saw us to the gate. Her smile remained, but her eyes were red. "Thank you for coming, Aurora," she said more softly than usual. "Thanks for having us," I replied, polite but not warm. She regarded me a moment. "The pie was delicious." "Really?" I paused. It was the first honest compliment I'd heard from her in years. "Thank you," I said. "He helped me pick every apple." She nodded, her eyes flicking to Ethan, then she looked down at her shoes. This time there were no more barbed comments. On the drive home, Ethan spoke up after a few minutes of silence. "Do you think they're hiding something?" "Their finances aren't stable," I replied. "And I think we'll find out the truth soon." Ethan looked at me, his expression hardening. "And when they come back?" I sat up straight, staring straight ahead. "I'll be waiting." That night, after I washed the pie trays and put the containers away in the kitchen, I sat on the wooden chair by the window and stared out at the backyard. The porch light cast a warm glow on the ground, throwing shadows of tree branches that swayed in the light breeze. Ethan was out by the chicken coop, checking the latch as he always did before bed. I heard the creak of the wooden gate, the thud of his wooden clogs on the dirt, then after a while the sink faucet turning on. He washed his hands, wiped his face, and came into the dining room where I was sitting. "You tired?" he asked, pouring 2 cups of chamomile tea. I shook my head and took the cup from him. "Not tired. Just a little empty." Ethan sat down across from me, looking at me as if reading my thoughts. "You thinking about Monica?" I nodded. "And Charles? And what Lily told us?" Ethan propped his elbow on the table. The lamplight caught in his eyes. "Maybe it's not true." "I hope it's not," I said. But I saw it, Ethan. The restlessness in her eyes. Her hand shaking when she poured the wine. The lines at the corners of her mouth I'd never seen before. "That's not fatigue. That's fear." He was quiet for a few seconds. "And if it's true, what will you do?" I lifted the cup to my lips. The warmth soothed the tightness in my chest. "Do nothing," I said. "We're not involved. I'll just remember." Ethan smiled softly and shook his head. "You always remember. Even when you say you won't." I didn't argue. There are things you can't quite let go of, even when you pretend not to care. The next day was overcast. Drizzle fell off and on all morning. I took the chance to go into town for new seed packets, then stopped by the little bakery on Main to pick up a bag of flour I'd ordered. While I was standing in line to pay, I saw Lily at the newsstand, her face tight with worry. "Lily," I called. She jumped and turned eyes wide. "Sister. I didn't think I'd run into you here." I moved closer. "Are you okay?" He swallowed. Yeah, fine. I just read this." She held up the Wall Street Ledger, the headline screaming, "Olson Capital Investment Firm under scrutiny for market manipulation. Serious financial fraud allegations." My chest tightened. Charles founded Olson Capital. The article mentioned risky investments that led to major losses for wealthy clients in under a year. It also said the firm was under SEC investigation and assets could be frozen. "I felt something was off at the party," Lily whispered. Monica told Mom Charles was having some trouble with a fund, but I never thought it was this bad. I folded the paper, paid, and we sat in the cafe next door. Lily kept still, her eyes flicking around like she was afraid someone would notice. Do Mom and Dad know? I asked. I think so. But they won't say. Mom just keeps making calls all day. Dad's silent, dodging questions. Has Monica told you anything else? Lily shook her head. She's not like the Monica I knew. He's snappy, irritable. Last night I overheard a phone call. It sounded like they might get sued. A client is demanding $10 million back. I didn't speak. Those old wedding taunts, Charles's sneering looks. Everything crowded into my head clearer than ever. Lily dropped her gaze. I didn't know if I should tell you. I know you've had enough from them. I put my hand over hers. Thank you for telling me. When I got home, Ethan was mowing the north field. I sat on the porch steps and stared into the distance. The wind coming off the pasture smelled of fresh grass and damp earth. The scent of the life I lived every day, peaceful enough to heal, strong enough to stand up to what's ahead. Ethan shut off the mower and walked toward me, a smear of green on his shirt, a water bottle in hand. Bad news? He asked when he saw my face. I told him everything. The article, Lily's words, the risk of Olsen Capital collapsing. He sat down beside me and wiped sweat from his brow. So they're falling, he said slowly. Question is, how far? I turned to him. I think they'll come here. Not to apologize, but to ask for help. Ethan let out a half laugh that wasn't really amused. And what will they bring with that? Family bonds. I closed my eyes. No. Pressure. Reputation. And guilt shaped into tears. He didn't say more, just squeezed my hand. No need for more words. In that squeeze I knew he was ready. Not to fight, but to let me do what's right, for myself, for our life, for the respect I deserve. A few days passed with no calls from Monica. Neither did Mom. But I could feel them preparing. Like soldiers choosing the moment to strike, they were picking their time. I didn't need to prepare. I had lived through their contempt, packed away every mocking remark and scornful glance into the back compartment of my heart long ago. Now we just had to wait for the knock on the door. And I had a feeling it would come sooner than I thought. That morning was gray, as if the sky itself felt the tension on the other end of the line. I was hoeing a row of bok choy when the kitchen phone rang. Ethan called out, Aurora, there's a call. I brushed the dirt off my hands and went inside, a bad feeling in my stomach. The screen showed Mom's number. Before I could answer, her voice came low and strained. Can you two come over this afternoon? There's something important, very important. The whole family will be there. I froze. Calls like that were rare, and hardly ever bore good news. What is it, Mom? Better to say in person. 2 p.m. Don't be late. She hung up before I could ask more. I sat at the edge of the table for a moment. Ethan came in from the porch, wiping his face with his sleeve. What's up? He asked, voice steady and low. They've asked us to come to my parents' house, I said. 2 p.m. The whole family. Mom said it's very important. Ethan didn't press. He looked at me like he'd already understood everything I didn't say. Are we going? He asked, eyes fixed on mine. I nodded. We have to. I want to see what they're up to. We left the farm just before 1 p.m. The wind ran across the ripened corn, turning the field into rolling bands of gold. Normally I'd feel peaceful. Today my chest was heavy. Whatever they say, Ethan said, remember one thing. We don't owe them anything. I turned to him. They are family. Family doesn't give anyone the right to hurt, he said. And it doesn't give anyone the right to take what we built. When we arrived, my parents' house looked the same. Brown roof, white picket fence, neatly clipped lawn. But the silence felt strange, like the whole place was holding its breath. The door opened as we reached the porch. Mom stood there, paler than usual. Dad lingered behind her, avoiding eye contact. Come in, Mom said quietly, then turned away into the living room. Ethan and I stepped in. Monica sat on the sofa, lacking the swagger I remembered. Her eyes were hollow, hands twisted together. Charles sat stiff, staring at the floor. Lily huddled near the window, arms folded as if shrinking herself smaller. My father gestured for us to sit in 2 chairs arranged opposite them, like a meeting already in session. No one smiled. No one greeted us. I broke the silence. What's happening? Monica spoke first, her voice hoarse and flat. Charles made a huge mistake. Some investments didn't work out. I looked straight at her. What exactly? Charles lifted his head, his face flushed but his eyes cold. I manage several retirement funds. Some of them belong to your parents. I trusted a new investment strategy, but the market crashed faster than we could react. I turned to my parents. Mom pinched her lips. Dad bowed his head. How much? Asked, my voice dry. 3 million, Mom answered almost in a whisper. I sat stunned. My breath felt like it was caught in my throat. Monica added, we're losing everything. This house is mortgaged. Accounts are frozen. They're threatening lawsuits. If we don't have collateral. So we need help, Dad interjected. Aura. You have a farm. Land, infrastructure. If you sell, we could save the family. Ethan tensed. I didn't look at him. I looked at each face in the room and asked slowly. You want us to sell the farm, give up everything we've built, to fix something we had nothing to do with? It's not a sacrifice, Mom said. Help. Family must stick together. When one falls, the others must lift them. I let out a dry laugh. Like when they mocked me at my wedding. Called me the blot on the family for marrying a tractor mechanic? Like when Dad told me to do something more worthwhile than selling produce at a market? Monica started to say something. Don't bring up the past. Don't teach me about the past, I cut her off. I haven't forgotten it. Ethan put his hand on my shoulder and said in a steady voice, this isn't a family meeting. This is a trial. And we are not the ones in debt here. Charles stood up, voice sharp. We're losing everything. You don't understand. You live in a bubble, planting vegetables, baking pies, thinking that's enough. Out there is the real world. And it's brutal. I stood too. No, Charles. The world you live in is gambling with other people's lives. Our life is what we've built with our own hands, day by day, with real sweat and real faith. And it is enough, more than enough. My father rose, his voice hard. You're being selfish, Aurora. Family is everything. I looked at him, eyes burning yet calm. If family is everything, then why for so many years was the only thing I received contempt? The living room fell silent. My mother reached up to wipe her eyes. Monica bowed her head. Charles took a step back. I turned to Ethan. He squeezed my hand. We didn't need to say more. Everything that needed saying was written across the faces in that room. And that silence, to me, rang louder than any apology. After leaving my parents' house, neither of us spoke on the drive back. Ethan didn't push. He drove with both hands on the wheel, eyes fixed ahead, but I could see the strain in his jaw. Red dust swirled in the air behind the truck, circling like the unnamed weight in my chest. When we got back to the farm, Ethan didn't go inside. He turned the engine off and faced me. You can change and rest for a bit, he said. But first, there's something I want to show you. I turned to him and caught his gaze, neither panicked nor angry. Only a quiet seriousness I rarely saw in that man. What is it? I asked. Come with me. He led me across the yard, around to the back of the large barn beside the sunflower field entering its season. The heavy steel door opened with a familiar creak. I stepped inside. The space was darker than outside, with the faint smell of old wood and machine oil in the air. Ethan switched on the light. The warm glow fell across shelves of parts, a neatly hung pegboard of tools, and a large safe built into the brick wall, hidden behind a whiteboard I'd never noticed before. What do you keep in there? I asked, my stomach beginning to flutter. Ethan unlocked it, punched in a code and turned the dial. The safe door eased open, and inside was not cash, nor deeds or a family will, but a thick stack of documents neatly clipped in a gray binder. He took it out and set it on the pine workbench, then motioned for me to come closer. You used to ask why I fiddled with junk all the time, why I kept fixing old machinery instead of resting like other people, he said. Here's the answer. I flipped to the first page. Patent. I read his name in the corner. Ethan Coleman, soil sensing automated irrigation system integrated with AI. The next page showed a detailed diagram down to each module, wireless control technology, designed specifically for small to medium-scale farms. My eyes fixed on the technical specifications. I'm no engineer, but I could tell it was complex and painstaking. When did you patent this? I asked, my voice hoarse with surprise. Started sketching it 7 years ago, he replied. Completed the first working version a year before our wedding. I looked up at him. But you're just a mechanic. Ethan smiled softly. I used to be a mechatronics engineer at NASA. I worked in the department that simulated crop dynamics in zero-gravity environments. I was stunned. You never told me. Because I left the job. Voluntarily. He sat down and flipped another stack of files. When I saw so much money poured into technology with no practical impact on farmers' lives, I decided to leave. Come back here. Start over from scratch. I was silent. My heart raced, not from anger but because of how much had been hidden that I'd never suspected. Remember when we first came here, we planted each bed and fixed those rusty irrigation pipes? Ethan smiled. Every one of those things was part of my test system. You thought we were just farming, but actually we were recording seasonal data, moisture levels, soil composition. And the company? I asked. I saw you at meetings a few times. You said you were meeting fertilizer suppliers. Stone Applied Tech. He nodded. I registered it under an independent legal name not directly linked to me. Each product I test here, if effective, I send samples to a lab in Missouri where I collaborate remotely. They continue industrial development and commercialize it. I leaned back against the bench, hands over my chest. You hid this from me for 3 years. Not to hide, he looked at me. But because I wanted something solid before I added expectations onto you. I didn't want you to think I was chasing a pipe dream. I wanted a foundation before I called it a future. I didn't know whether to be angry or moved. I only felt the world I stood in suddenly become much larger. All the things once mocked as playing in the dirt now had depth, purpose, and scale. And where are we now? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Where do we stand in all of this? Ethan opened a financial report. The figure at the bottom of the page made me sit down hard in a chair. 6 digits following the 5 glared in bold. We're running a company valued at nearly $50 million. There are 3 patents expanding into distribution. A cooperative project with the Department of Agriculture is in trial stages. And a soil analysis platform has been ordered by 2 major universities in the West. I covered my mouth. My eyes stung. So, this farm is more than just where we live? Ethan placed his hand over mine. It's an R&D center. The heart of it all. And it belongs to us. I let out a laugh that had tears in it. And they want us to sell it, to fix what they caused. Yes, Ethan said slowly. They want us to sacrifice what they don't even understand the true value of. I looked at him, my voice catching. If I agree, if I nod out of pity, they will destroy something that could feed a whole community. Ethan squeezed my hand gently. His eyes were not the farmer's look I had assumed, but that of a true builder, calm, decisive, and deeply humane. We will not let that happen, he said. But before they realize what they've lost, they'll have to see the whole picture. I nodded. A strange feeling rose inside me, not fury, not triumph. Rather the sense you get when standing before a new horizon where you no longer need to prove anything to anyone. Because the truth at last was strong enough to speak for itself. On that Saturday afternoon, a strong autumn wind sent the corn leaves rustling across the field. I was at the kitchen table peeling apples for a new batch of preserves when someone knocked at the door in rapid succession. Ethan wiped his hands and went to open it. I heard the familiar cool voice say, "Aurora, we need to talk now." My heart hammered. Monica came in wearing a tailored gray suit, her makeup perfect but her eyes revealing fatigue. Beside her stood a stranger in a black suit holding a leather briefcase. Behind them my parents followed, their faces taut. "This is Attorney Connors," Monica introduced, her tone urgent. "He has the necessary documents prepared." I frowned. "What documents?" The man set the briefcase on the table, opened it, smoothed a thick packet and pushed it toward me. "A transfer agreement for full ownership of the farm to a third party. If you sign, the sale will proceed immediately. The funds will be used to pay urgent debts the family faces." I stared at the stack of papers, then looked up. "You intend to sell our lives away?" My father cleared his throat. "Aurora, this is for the greater good. Without money we lose everything. You're part of this family. You must understand your responsibility." I gripped the paring knife hard, then slammed it down on the table. "What responsibility?" The responsibility to cover Charles's mistake? To make up for people blindly risking their retirement funds on a reckless gamble. My mother stepped forward, voice trembling but determined. You can't be selfish. The family needs you. We've sacrificed for you. Now it's your turn to shoulder the burden. Sacrifice. I laughed bitterly. For years you mocked my choices, criticized my husband, humiliated us at the party. And now when you fall into ruin you call it sacrifice, and ask us to erase what we built. Monica slapped the table, cutting me off. Don't play the victim, Aurora. This is the time the family must unite. If you sign, we might preserve our name and standing. If not, everything will collapse. Ethan, who had been silent until now, stepped forward and placed a hand on my shoulder. His voice was calm, each word deliberate. Honor cannot be built through coercion. And this farm, this is not for sale. Attorney Connors raised an eyebrow. Mr. Coleman, as legal owners, the Blairs would have the right to force a transfer if this land falls under jointly mortgaged family assets. You're mistaken. Ethan turned and walked to the metal shelf in the corner of the barn where he'd stashed a locked brief. He set it on the table, opened it, and pulled out pages, presenting them to everyone. These are patent number 10,845,392 and 11,203,847, granted by the United States Patent Office, he said in a steady voice. This is a research cooperation agreement with the Department of Agriculture, carrying federal protections. And this, he set down another stack, is the certificate showing title to this land belongs to Stone Tech Incorporated, entirely separate from any financial obligations of the Blair family. The room fell completely silent. Monica's eyes widened at the bright red seals. Charles, who'd been standing behind her, let out a muffled curse and turned pale. Attorney Connors picked up the documents, flipping through them with a suddenly uncertain expression. This, he stammered. If true, then this is inviolate. Federally protected. My father scowled, voice low. Ethan, how long have you been hiding this? You an engineer? You started a company? All these years, was it just a game? Ethan did not blink. Not a game. Serious work with practical results. The fields you called worthless vegetable plots are the testing grounds for systems that could change American agriculture. My mother brought a hand to her mouth, tears welling. Monica took a step back, voice breaking. Aurora, you knew? You hid this from me. I looked straight at her, feeling pain and relief at once. I didn't hide anything. I only learned recently. But unlike you, I don't make a habit of despising what I don't understand. No one answered. Only the rustle of paper as Attorney Connors carefully replaced the patents, his face grave. I'm sorry, he said to Monica. I can't proceed. This agreement is legally void. Any attempt to coerce will likely violate federal law. Monica looked around for some rescue, but there was only silence. Charles bowed his head, hands trembling. My father sank into a chair, speechless. In that room I felt a complete reversal. The one once deemed weak stood firm while the proud ones sagged. In that moment I realized, true power wasn't the loudest voice in the room, but the undeniable truth laid out on the table. The air in the room stiffened after Ethan revealed the legal files confirming the farm belonged to Stone Tech. I could still hear my mother's sharp breaths, the chair scraping as my father leaned back, and the soft crumple of documents in Attorney Connors's hands. But Ethan didn't stop. He straightened, eyes sharp as a blade, and set another file on the table. One more thing, he said, his tone flat and cold. Something everyone needs to hear. Charles sat up, about to interrupt. Stop, don't. Ethan didn't give him the chance. This is the trading report from the Securities Commission. It shows explicitly, Mr. Charles Olson, as director of Olson Capital, used Robert and Linda Blair's retirement funds to bet on Stone Tech's failure in the market. My mother let her hand fall from her mouth, eyes wide. My father slammed the table. What? I took the file and flipped through the pages. Dense numbers, short sale orders, and finally the commission's seal. Stone Tech's stock had quintupled in value over 2 years. Instead of profit, my parents' life savings had evaporated. You did, my mother choked, looking at Charles. You took our money to bet on my daughter and her husband's company failing? Charles went pale, sweat beading on his forehead. Who could have predicted this company would rise? Most AG startups fail. I thought. You thought what? I interrupted, my voice ringing in the silent room. That calling my husband a mudslinger would make the world believe you? That your blind pride could turn contempt into reality? I turned to Monica. Her face changed color, lips trembling. You called my life the family's only blot. You laughed at my homemade wedding dress, toasted your friends while I brought apple pie to the table. Yet it is your husband who has torn apart this family. Not me. Not Ethan. Monica began to cry, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Aura. I know. Charles said, everything was safe. Safe, my father roared. You call shorting my daughter's company safe? He pointed a shaking finger at Charles. You took the retirement we saved through 40 years of work and threw it into a gamble to prove you were right. You didn't just betray your wife. You betrayed this whole family. Charles stepped back, trying to speak, but no words came. I moved slowly toward Monica, all the years of resentment pressing into my gaze. You stood at my wedding and told everyone marrying a tractor mechanic was a disgrace to the Blairs. You looked down on me as a failure. Now do you have the courage to face the truth? That the man you chose to spend your life with destroyed your parents' lives? That he bet on my failure and because of that everything collapsed? Monica hugged her face and sobbed, her body shaking. No more haughtiness, no more icy smile. Only a helpless woman, sitting amid the wreckage her husband had created. Attorney Connors cleared his throat, his voice dry. With this evidence, if the Blairs choose to pursue it, they could absolutely sue Olson Capital for misappropriating retirement funds. It could even warrant a criminal investigation. My mother looked at me, tears streaming down her face. Aura. I was wrong not to believe you. I thought choosing Monica's path was the safe option. But now. My father slumped down into a chair, eyes hollow. He no longer had the commanding air he usually did. Only silence remained, as if he had just watched the family stronghold he had built his whole life collapse before him. Ethan put his hand on my shoulder and gave a small nod as if to yield the floor to me. I scanned the room, taking in each familiar yet suddenly strange face. This family has looked down on me and my husband for too long. But today is proof enough. Value doesn't live on business cards or in mansions or luxury cars. Value lives in truth. And the truth is, Ethan built a company that can change American agriculture. Charles took my parents' life savings and bet on the failure of that very company. No one answered. Only Monica's sobbing, my mother's heavy breathing, and an oppressive silence. In that moment, a years-long fury flared and then slowly ebbed. I no longer needed to prove anything. The truth lay naked, needing no more justification. My mother remained slumped in her chair, hands clenched so tight they trembled. Her face was wet, lipstick smudged at the corners of her mouth. My father paced once around the wooden table like an animal cornered. He had always carried himself with dignity, but now his shoulders sagged and deep lines marked his face. He turned to me, his voice rough. Aurora, you are the family's only hope. If you agree to help, we have a way to survive. If not. He left the sentence hanging, his eyes bloodshot. My mother lunged forward, grabbing my sleeve, her voice breaking. Please, daughter. You can save your parents. You can help the whole family get through this. You and Ethan have everything. We have nothing left but you. I looked down at the hand clutching my sleeve, feeling hundreds of memories tear open. I saw the wedding ceremony all over again. Monica raising her glass and calling me the blot, the audience laughing. I saw the lavish party at her mansion where my apple pie was mocked as country. I remembered Charles's disdainful look, asking whether the farm could even cover their gas money. And my father's cold voice that day, when will you do something worthier than selling vegetables at the market? They all rushed back, a pressure in my chest. I shoved my mother's hand away and stood up. You call me the only hope? You only remember me when there's no one else to cling to. For all these years, have I ever been your hope? Or have I only been a burden, a shameful shadow everyone wanted to hide? My father roared, don't speak to me like that. We gave you a home, we sent you to school. I cut him off, my voice icy. Sent me to school so that when I held my diploma you could call it a worthless piece of paper? So when I built this farm you could call it child's play? When I found the love of my life, you turned my wedding into a show of humiliation. My mother broke down crying. Monica curled up beside her, too ashamed to look up. Charles stood rigid as a statue, speechless after being exposed. I took a deep breath and turned to my parents. Family isn't an excuse to exploit. You've told me over and over that I must sacrifice for the greater good. But who has sacrificed for me? When I was mocked, when I was belittled, when I was called the blot, did any of you stand up for me? The living room dropped into silence. I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. Ethan came forward and placed a hand on my back, his voice steady. We don't owe anyone anything. Not a dollar, not a single tear. I swept my eyes across the room so that each family member could see the resolve in mine. Then I spoke slowly but firmly. You want money? Go find it somewhere else. This farm is not a patch to mend someone else's mistakes. Ethan and I will not sell, will not sign, will not yield. And from today on, don't set foot here to make demands. Get off our land right now. Monica sobbed and collapsed into our mother's arms. Charles went ashen, unable to rebut a single word. My father stood stunned as if he could not believe his ears. My mother tried to plead, voice thin. Aurora, you're going to drive your parents away? I clenched my fist but did not tremble. If you still consider me your daughter, respect my choice. If not, that door is right there. I don't want to hear another word. Ethan opened the front door wide. The wind from the fields rushed in, carrying the scent of earth and dried grass. None of them moved immediately. Slowly, each person rose under the weight of it all. My father bowed his head, my mother steadied herself on his arm. Monica trailed behind, shoulders shaking. Charles silently pulled up his collar, avoiding everyone's gaze. The click of heels echoed on the wooden floor and faded away. When the door shut, the house sank into stillness. I dropped into a chair, tears spilling, not from weakness but because for the first time I had stood tall before people who had always belittled me. Ethan knelt before me, took my hand and whispered, "You did what needed to be done." I nodded, wiping my tears with the back of my hand. The pain remained but mingled with something else, a sense of release. The next morning I woke to the familiar crowing of roosters and sunlight slipping through the window. The farm's peacefulness let me forget for a moment my parents' drawn faces, Monica's choked sobs, and Charles's silent shadow from the night before. But that calm didn't last long. Around 9 a.m. we heard engines in the distance. I stepped onto the porch and saw a convoy of black SUVs and a small truck bearing the U.S. Department of Agriculture logo drive up the dirt road to the farm. Red dust clouded behind them. Ethan, who was checking the pump in the yard, stopped and glanced up, then wiped his hands and walked over to me. A group emerged from the vehicles. Leading them was a woman in a navy jacket clutching a file. 2 young engineers with laptops and a few staff with notebooks followed. The woman smiled and moved forward to shake Ethan's hand. "Mr. Coleman, I'm Susan Miller, Director of the Applied Research Program at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. It's a pleasure to meet you and your wife in person." Ethan nodded and introduced me. "This is Aurora, my wife, my partner in all these projects." Susan turned to me and gave a firm handshake. "I read your report. Impressive. The soil sensing technology combined with automated irrigation you've developed could change how farmers across the West cope with drought. We're here to officially sign a research funding agreement." I froze. Funding? Ethan smiled softly. He mentioned it to me briefly, but it wasn't the time to go into details. Susan opened her briefcase, spread a thick contract across the long pine table in the kitchen. The bold numbers stood out. $5 million, funding over 5 years for the research project titled Drought-Resilient Crop Technology for Arid U.S. Lands. I was stunned. $5 million wasn't just a number. It was proof that what we'd been doing on this small plot had stretched beyond family boundaries and reached the national level. Ethan read through the pages carefully, asking a few legal questions. Susan patiently answered, explaining intellectual property rights, reporting conditions, and StoneTech's continued commercialization rights. I listened, my heart a tight knot of awe and something I couldn't quite name. While Monica boasted about her mansion, Charles bragged about investment deals, and my parents never took the farm seriously, the federal government was placing its trust in the work we had quietly built. One of the young engineers opened his laptop and projected a map of the arid regions in the West. We ran simulations on real-world data. If StoneTech's system is applied, Yields could increase by 40% under water-scarce conditions. It could not only save harvests but reduce rural outmigration. I felt goosebumps. Images of cracked fields, families leaving their land for livelihoods elsewhere, and children weakened by food insecurity flashed through my mind. I never imagined that planting beds and installing pipes might one day affect millions of people. Ethan signed the contract, Susan signed next. They shook hands and applause broke out in the kitchen. From today, Susan said, this farm will become one of the department's official testing centers. We'll provide equipment, personnel, and guaranteed funding. You will no longer be just a small farm, you will be a government research partner. I had to brace myself on the table to stay upright. Ethan looked at me, eyes full of pride. See, he whispered. While they called us a blot, we actually hold a chance to change the world. I squeezed his hand. A bitter and brilliant feeling rose up inside me. Bitter because the barbed remarks that once tore at my heart were still raw in memory. Brilliant because the present proved that our efforts had never been in vain. When the convoy drove away, the fields returned to their quiet. But inside me, the silence was no longer the same. What had happened felt like a light cutting through the darkness that my family had cast over us for so many years. I stood on the porch, staring at the temporary sign nailed to the wooden gate. Stone Tech Research Facility, a steady, unshakable belief swelling in my chest. No matter how much they had looked down on us, no matter if they turned away, the path Ethan and I chose was opening up for far more people than anyone in my family had ever imagined. That afternoon I sat on the front porch with a steaming cup of apple tea. The sky was painted orange and red, thin clouds streaking like careless brushstrokes across a giant canvas. Ethan sat beside me, his hand holding mine, squeezing just enough to let a sense of peace wash over me. We didn't need many words. Crickets chirped in the fields, the scent of rain-soaked earth filled the air, all of it a reminder that this place was truly ours. A small car pulled up to the gate. I recognized the figure who stepped out, Lily, my youngest. She wore a simple sweater, her hair tied back, no makeup. I was surprised. Lily rarely came by on her own. Sis Aurora. Her voice trembled as she climbed the porch steps. Can I sit with you for a while? I nodded. Ethan got up and went into the kitchen so we'd have some privacy. Lily sat next to me, her hands clasped tightly, eyes on the wooden floor. I'm sorry, she said, voice breaking. For years I stayed silent while you were humiliated and dismissed. I saw it all, but I didn't speak. I was afraid of being seen as disloyal to Mom and Dad, afraid Monica would be angry, afraid of losing the so-called peace. But looking back, my silence was the biggest betrayal to you. I breathed deeply, my chest felt heavy. All those years Lily had been quietly gentle, avoiding conflict. I had been angry at her, thinking she was like the rest, treating me as a thorn. But in her eyes now I saw true remorse. Lily, I said softly, I always wished you'd stand with me even once. Hearing this now lifts a weight from me. She looked up, tears streaming down. I promise from now on I'll really be by your side. Not for anyone else, not to save face for the family, but because you're the one who never turned your back on me. I pulled her into my arms. Her warmth soothed my heart. For the first time I saw her not as the shy girl she used to be, but as someone learning to grow from the wreckage. A few weeks later, news about my family filled the local papers. Monica's luxury mansion was repossessed after Charles defaulted. The flashy cars their friends once admired were hauled away with clanging chains. My parents, Robert and Linda, had to sell jewelry and antiques to cover small debts, and their retirement funds were essentially gone. Charles was summoned by federal investigators. He faced a series of charges related to financial fraud and misuse of client funds. Lily told me Monica completely collapsed and could no longer maintain her previous proud posture. The sister who had carried the family's pride was now only a shadow of herself. One evening, after reading the article about Charles being barred from leaving the state while awaiting trial, I set the paper down and sighed. Ethan looked at me with a questioning look. Do you feel satisfied? He asked. I was quiet for a moment, then shook my head. No. I just feel empty. My whole life I thought I needed their approval. I worked hard, studied, behaved in ways I hoped would make them proud. But today I realize true value doesn't come from blood ties. It comes from what we build. This land, the work that is nurturing thousands of hopes. Ethan smiled and pulled my head to rest on his shoulder. I always believed in you. Now the whole world will see it too. The sky shifted to deep purple. The last streaks of sunset spread out like a promise. I held Ethan's hand tighter. In that moment I could see my path clearly, no longer clouded by the shadows of the past. We walked out into the fields where the wind ran through the rows of drying corn and the scent of new grass lingered. Ethan stopped, looked at me, and his warm voice carried across the open space. We're going to feed millions of people. And no one can take that away. I nodded, a smile touching my lips. In the golden field at dusk I felt it plainly. Freedom, justice, and happiness, everything was within reach. Sitting on the porch later when night had fallen, I wondered. If one day your family looked down on you, treated you like a burden, then later came back begging, would you forgive them or protect the life you built? I want to hear your thoughts because every person has a unique story, a pain, and a different choice. For me, the lesson is this. True worth is not what others think of you but what you build, protect, and cherish with your own hands. Family only matters when it's paired with respect and sincerity. If you resonated with my story, leave a comment and tell me your perspective. And don't forget to follow the channel to keep listening to more stories about life, family, and the small choices that can change a person's whole life.